Okay, thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here and to talk about people. We tend to overlook the importance of people, given the fact that we're building for them. So this is just a quick reminder of who they are. It's based on an event we held for the Ministry of Housing as part of their Better Design for Better Places conference in February. Our aim was to develop with a diverse group of people a community vision for communal housing and neighborhood design, but also addressing the demographic shifts that are happening in the upcoming future. So we had to look at some of these current trends and get to grips with what they were. So the first thing is, of course, we've never had so much demand for housing. And as we can see here, we've got a target of 300,000, and only 50% of local authorities are going to accomplish this particular target, their targets. And of course, now there is also an implication to not delivering. I think for me, this is very much about understanding that the priority seems to be on pace of delivery. And the implication is that meaningful engagement, particularly with people from diverse backgrounds and early on in the process, to co-produce the design brief isn't being taken seriously and could somehow lead to more delays in that pace of delivery that's needed. But also there's an implication that good design and putting social infrastructure first has somehow a financial implication as well that may make a scheme unviable, further delaying this need, an urgent need to build new homes. But who are we building for? And this is something that I think a few of us yesterday on one of the study tours was beginning to question. We visited a scheme where there were 338 units, of which there were no social rent, and a small proportion of shared ownership and affordable housing. The two-bed apartments were going for between £300,000 and £650,000. Now, Milton Keynes alone has about 2,000 people on its waiting list. And so that's just Milton Keynes. And if we've got a target of 300,000 and these kinds of waiting lists, who are we designing and building for? And I think it's kind of critical for us to be thinking about ensuring that we get the mix right. I think Rotterdam has already started to kind of put those parameters down. I think that's a very good way forward. But it's not all bad news. We do have some good news. We have national planning policy framework on our side with the revisions, particularly placing a lot of emphasis on housing need assessment. Which has now become a standard test for housing delivery. It also is stressing the importance of diversity in size, type, and tenure, and has identified quite a number of different types of people that we should be delivering this housing for. Another trend that we've identified is this importance of a major public health issue, which is increasing numbers of people who are feeling isolated and lonely. And some of the statistics are quite scary. 13% of us feel lonely all the time. And this isn't just older people, this is actually all age groups. And also 1 million people aged 65 and over often feel lonely. These are large percentages and large numbers of people. So it is, in fact, a real issue that we need to be considering with a £1 billion in costs to healthcare and also £800 million that is costing in sick days. A recent study by LSE suggested it'll cost £6,000 per person in health and social care costs over a decade. So it's not just a financial burden, it's also got implications to how we design. We've got to be designing places that are lively, convivial, and promote this kind of social interaction. And again, the NPPF supports us. It has an entire chapter on health and well-being, talking about promoting social interaction, asking us to create safe and accessible places, and also enabling healthy lifestyles. So it's all enshrined in policy. A third trend we've looked at is that we're living longer. This is some statistics. 20% of people in England will be over 65 by 2030. And 3.2 million people in the UK will be over 85 by 2041. But then also there are implications of aging, like dementia. And here you have a big shift between 2012 and 2051 from 800,000 people with dementia to 1,700,000 people. So again, the implication is, are we designing neighborhoods that are dementia friendly? Another trend is we're becoming more diverse, and you can see from this graph that we have an increasing percentage of cultural diversity. And so again, are we designing housing, are we designing neighborhoods that are culturally nuanced? Do we understand the various needs of different communities that exist within our cities? And of course, we're living longer alone. And you can see here comparing 2008 with 2033, the purple being 2033, you can see a marked increase in the number of people who are going to be living alone. Are we providing enough housing for those types of people? And again, it's not one particular age group. You can see along the bottom, you've got the whole range of ages. So we then move on to the NPPF in terms of design policy. And so, again, it's telling us that we need to be designing for these types of people, reflecting local aspirations and understanding the area's defining characteristics. And this is where I believe community engagement is absolutely critical. And I want to talk a little bit about how we do community engagement with these types of diverse groups and maybe give you some highlights of how we do it at Mela. The other thing is that we need to have this early consultation, so we understand who it is we're actually designing for and actually include them in the design brief process, something that, again, the NPPF is encouraging. But of course, the thing about the NPPF is it's not worded very strongly. It's, applicants should work closely and effective engagement with the community should be looked on more favorably. So maybe that's one of the reasons why we don't take this seriously enough yet. And then we have other things like different tools of engagement, like, for example, design advice and review, various frameworks, building for life, some of the tools that we can use. Again, the wording, authorities should have regard for these types of processes and tools. So, in effect, we have a lot of evidence and also we have a lot of guidance. But it does beg the question, why aren't we doing it? So I just wanted to spend a minute talking about some of the impacts of doing nothing. So first of all, we know about the public health bill of £1 billion per year if we don't tackle isolation and loneliness. And of course, we're not, the reason is because the impact of it is on our health in terms of depression, heart disease, other stress and activity related illnesses. But also, second, we've got older people who are going to be too afraid, frankly, and too isolated to leave their homes, either because they're afraid of getting lost or because they can't drive. And the third impact is that we may also experience high cases of crime, violence, and vandalism, which will happen because of socioeconomic inequality. And here's just an example I picked out that, essentially we're still building in the same way, even today, primarily with the convenience of the car rather than for convenience of people. And yesterday, again, we went around some of these schemes, and I kept asking myself, would I leave my child to play here? Would I be able to hang out with my neighbors easily without feeling it's a bit awkward because there's a car between us? Our doors weren't close together. There aren't maybe places where we could meet that's in front of our doorstep. Having said that, there were some lovely landscaped areas, so I do commend Milton Keynes for its landscaping strategy, but there are also other bits of social infrastructure that are needed for people to meet. And so we're just not giving enough space for things to happen. spontaneously, and in a neighborly and friendly way. And in the same place, of course, where it has a profile, and this profile isn't very mixed and isn't very diverse, which is encouraging us to create these kind of socioeconomic segregated enclaves in our neighborhoods, whether it's by socioeconomics or whether it's by cultural diversity. So why? Why is it that we don't take people that seriously, and we don't take also community engagement seriously, and we don't take social infrastructure all that seriously? Maybe it just seems too difficult. And I just want us to be very honest that maybe this is just a very difficult exercise to go out and spend the time bringing people in to ask them what they actually want. Maybe there's a perception it's too time-consuming or too expensive. Maybe bespoke design for these impromptu social interactions are also expensive, and it's easier just to take a design off the shelf or some standard designs and implement those. So Mela wanted to demonstrate that actually, yes, it does require effort. It requires an intention, and it requires a commitment. And it's possible. And what we did was we invited a very culturally diverse group of people to come, and we kind of socially engineered it, to be frank, to make sure we had all the right people in the room to be able to give an informed understanding of what their needs are for communal housing and neighborhood design. So we asked a few questions. Do you want just another housing estate, or do you really want a neighborhood? And our aim was to understand what would be a livable neighborhood for these people. And what I'm going to present to you are the sketches we did on the day. It's not rocket science. It's very intuitive, but it requires planning. And so I'll just share some of these things. We asked them, what is it about their neighborhood that they like to do, and where do they like to do it? And how long would it take them to get there? The ideal time, whether it's on foot or on a bike, on the bus or in a car. And the usual things were mentioned. All of these local amenities were 5 minutes by any mode of transport. That's the ideal neighborhood for them. They mentioned this idea of, they want the village feel. I don't believe they wanted village as in sort of scale or style of development, but I think it was more like the village feel. You know your neighbors, you know your community. You can spend time together. Other things were, increasing the density around certain streets where you can have all of these amenities close by. Flexibility of some of these community spaces. In one particular table, we had this importance of a barbecue nearby where you can share food, again, in a very impromptu way. Whoops. And this idea of a community hub, which doesn't have to be a bespoke building, but it can just be the coming together of various types of activities that happen to be together: a reading room, a creche, a youth center, a yoga studio, using existing infrastructure like a school or a hall, and having those used, 24 hours a day, open after hours. And then we asked them, can we design places that help us stay connected with people? Again, this was now scaling down to the scale of a street and a group of houses. Are there bits of social infrastructure that we can design into a small cluster of houses or along a street? Things like, for example, shared kitchens or shared workspaces, shared laundry rooms, a shared shed. All of these little things that we can use together to create that communal feel. And what came up over and over again was the importance of community gardening, just areas within reach of your home that can provide that place for coming together, doing things together within easy reach of your doorstep. And the importance of the street as a place to play, a place to meet on the corner, and of course integrating it with important transport routes. Yeah, and then the third question was, what choice of housing will meet your changing needs over your lifetime? And then here we've scaled down even further into the idea of the adaptable home. And there's a lot here, but essentially it's about how do you subdivide a house as you downsize or expand it as you you have a growing family, but also if you're going to be looking after your elderly mother or father, do you need a granny flat? Increasingly young people can't live on their own, because they are, they can't afford it, so do we have a little space for them as well? Can we convert lofts and so on? But also the idea of having a compact, energy-efficient, waste-efficient space. Okay, so the second thing I'm going to whiz through this is just the guide we wrote for the Ministry of Housing on how to engage diverse groups. And I'm not going to go through everything, but just some of the highlights of our practice, so I could share it with you. So essentially, we had the intention, we set out to say we wanted to have a diverse group of people around the table. And I think that was very important from the outset. This is the type of mix we had. We included also people on mobility scooters and with other disabilities, non-visible disabilities. And we actually made a point of making sure all of these types of people were there in the room. We also engaged with where those people usually coalesce or hang out. And of course, there are certain organizations, because we didn't have very much of a big turnaround, we contacted some of these organizations, created a personal relationship with them by calling them up or meeting them, and telling them that this isn't just another exercise. There are incentives, they're going to be filmed, it's for the Ministry of Housing, they're going to take it seriously, so they felt that their time was valued. And this is one of the things that maybe is a little bit time consuming, but mostly if you can, pick up the phone and speak to the participants. We built up a relationship with them. We made sure that they were looked after, all their concerns were taken care of, and particularly things like making sure that they had all their catering needs met and accessibility. But this process of getting in touch with the participants beforehand is actually part of the success of any community engagement, because you're managing their expectations, you're making sure they show up, and of course you're reducing the prospect of NIMBYism and people just coming in to rant and make a fuss. But I think one of the other things is looking at our professional makeup. And one of the things that was very noticeable is that we have to also have a representative delivery team for the engagement process. And so people can relate to us. I chose very carefully my facilitation team to ensure that we have the kind of diversity that reflected the people in the room. And we also engineered who was around the table, either because they had a shared interest or because they had mixed views, and then they could actually negotiate their design brief with the facilitator. And of course, making them feel important and valued, and supporting them with issues like, for example, there was one lady with a hijab who didn't want to be photographed, making sure that we respected her values, but there are also maybe people who don't speak English as a first language. So you've got to be also giving them other opportunities to engage. And finally, this is our campaign that we set up as a result of that. And Mela is working with the Urban Design Group and Academy of Urbanism to put forward an idea to the Ministry of Housing to investigate why is it we don't engage, and why is it we don't have the sort of social infrastructure first policy. And is it because it's got something to do with money? Thank you. Oh, okay.
Thanks very much, Noha. If you just stay there, we'll take some questions on this theme, because I think the first part you started with the analysis and understanding aging and the implications of changing demographics, but also going into kind of tools and techniques. so that I know a lot of the people in the room have tried, and we've had the angry meetings, we've had the creative meetings, and sometimes we've had them both at the same time. The issue is, if we don't engage people, they are so far behind understanding what might be happening, but they're not in a position, as your advice, to inform what they need. And I thought that bit about finding open shared space, outdoor shared space, and also in a neighbourhood or community, indoor spaces as well, seem to be quite an important component. Are there any comments or questions, or indeed experiences from within the room that you'd like to tell us about? Yes.
You put, sorry, Richard Reed. Sorry, you talked about 16 to 24 years old people, but we work with a lot of 7 to 11-year-olds, and we think they're actually the best. In a way, I hate to say it. I mean, they throw up a lot of ideas. But I assume I assume you had been working with them, but you haven't put it on the...
I have worked with them in the past, but on this particular workshop, we focused on young people who are about to go into housing or are thinking about their housing. Yeah, that's why we chose that age group. Thank you.
Got one here.
Hi, James Gross, Urban Place Lab again. I'd just like to echo that last point, actually. We, last summer, went through an engagement process. We were doing a wayfinding project, and our client was the district council. They'd asked us to do a report, stick it on the shelf, and we opted to sort of cut our budget in half and use half of it actually to implement open space in this area we were doing. We didn't have permission. We got absolute rollicking from the county council for putting benches and planting on their area of land. But when we did it, we worked with 4 schools, but working with the teenagers was hard as it absolutely gets, getting them to be motivated. And I'd echo the previous point, is that actually we worked with 4 primary schools, and the reward that we got actually for working with those schools was far, far greater. And whilst we like to work with people who are perhaps going and thinking to housing, actually that was probably the last thing on their mind.
Yeah, there is a shift as if I can call them, teenagers begin to take on a lot of the behaviours of their parents and grandparents. That creativity that you get from kind of 7 to 13 often diminishes, I think we find.
Although I do want to say something about them in support. There are a lot of young people nowadays who are taking leadership positions. In fact, one of the young people we had here is on the board of the YMCA Birmingham. A pretty astounding young man with an amazing future. So I think that we don't want to give up on them.
No, I don't. I think people were being honest about their experiences of the challenges.
Yeah,
of it.
there are challenges.
And I think you're absolutely right. We mustn't. Yes.
Yeah.
I was involved in writing a document called Accommodating Diversity that was to highlight the different social needs for every social group. And this document was funded by the National Federation of Housing Association and the Housing Corporation. And that was to highlight to the architects the social needs for each individual group that is required before you have these consultation meetings with them.
Fantastic.
Are you aware of the document?
No, in fact, I'd like to know your name and where did you publish it?
Yeah. Okay,
Please.
I'll speak to you after.
No, tell everyone.
Oh, right. No, well, the document has been around for about 20 years, and it is still referred to by a number of associations that...
So what's it called again?
It's called Accommodating Diversity.
Okay, and who published it?
National Federation of Housing Association.
Okay, you did say that actually, thank you. And your name?
My name's Audley English.
Okay.
Thanks.
Architect, developer.
Great, thank you very much
Modular.
for that.
Just building on that point about, these are kind of almost setting out principles before we start, but any stories from any of you who are designers or developers who've gone out to community and have got a story that you're willing to tell us about? David?
David Locke, please. I'm sorry, David Locke. I'm a planner and urban designer. You've got a big experience and reputation, your organisation, for this work. So can I ask a couple of questions which maybe bridge to the next session about the regional scale? Does the way you work, do the outputs change much if the proportion of ethnic minorities or other kinds of minority groups are strong in your assembly? Or are there some, what I'm chasing is, are there some eternal things about human beings?
Yeah.
Your diagram of flexible housing made a point about a house that can become 100 things over its lifetime. The question just now implied we need 36 types of houses for all the kind of people we are. The awkwardness of that is if we change who we are, we're stuck in a box and can't move out. So the question is, say it again if I may, in the different experiences you've got, how tilted is the outcome according to the composition of people who are sitting in your sessions?
Yeah.
Or is there some eternal verity that you can share with us that seems to come out of these workshops about human beings?
I think that's a very good question. I think we are all human beings. We have the same requirements of the kinds of activities we do at home. I think there may be other cultural nuances. From my experience working with with Midland Heart, an RSL, a registered social landlord in Birmingham, we did some work with Bangladeshi women and Pakistani families, and we discovered things like, what is the center of the home is the kitchen, and that is where also the women and the children spend a lot of time. The front of the house is more a place where they, almost like the old English parlor, where you had your nice furniture, and that's where the males generally tend to congregate. So there are like nuances, but actually when you look at a plan of a house, if you've got the right spatial choice, then people can easily adapt within that kind of spatial layout. So it's just understanding those nuances and understanding what is important, what is not important. Like for example, also the elderly. A lot of Asian families have a lot of elderly to look after. After a certain age, after 55, they move in, and so they need to have downstairs rooms that can be adapted to a bedroom. So it's just things like that, understanding these nuances. But there's threads. As we saw here, it's not rocket science, it's very intuitive, threads that we can pull right through from home up to neighborhood. Yeah.
Okay. It was really interesting seeing the development down by the canal yesterday, where there were a whole range of it. It wasn't an infinite range, but of different kinds of homes, larger, smaller, but with, I think I'm right in saying that the living space is sometimes above the bedroom
Higher,
space.
yeah.
But that I think, I can't remember where Peter is now, you're saying that wouldn't be applicable for everybody, but there's a niche group who might be interested in that kind of lifestyle and that housing unit. So that idea, I think, that you were implying is there's a range. Not everyone wants to live in exactly the same way. So maybe we've got to track down some of that research from 20 years ago and look at successor variants. So thanks very much, Noah. That's been a fantastic lead-in to the next session, which is almost the planning for those people. But you've set us up very well in terms of the context of understand the people, get to them, get their feeding into the brief. Thanks very much to Noha Nasser. Thank you.